Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Mind, Body, Musings podcast. Today, we have a super luscious guest with us, Miss Sarah Poet, who is an alchemical life coach, healer, and teacher who activates modern women on a soul path of fully reclaiming her energetic, spiritual, and financial sovereignty by transmuting her feminine and masculine trauma and standing in the full and unified truth of who she is. Yes. She's the host of the Sacred Remembering podcast for women, waking up to the truth of who they are. You can watch her TEDx on reclaiming the feminine and masculine within each human, as well as read her blog and more at sarahpoet.com. Okay, I have a few thoughts running through my head right now. The first one is, I fucking love your last name so much.
Oh, thank you. So I named myself.
Okay, that was the second question. I was wondering if you, wow. So
Yeah.
just last name or also first name?
No, first name I was given at birth. And then I had my father's last name and I had a husband's last name. And I kept that last name because it's my son's last name. So my name is Sarah Shoemaker Poet. So I kept the Shoemaker for my son. But then, I was divorced and I had committed myself to this soul journey. And when I was a little girl and I would take my little red wagon around the neighborhood, there was a mailbox with the name Poet, a couple of blocks from my house. It was like as far as I could venture. And I have a memory, I don't know if I made it up or if it's real, but I was pulling my wagon and the sun is like hitting the name Poet. And I thought, that's supposed to be my name. And so I thought that my whole life. And in 2018, I left my career as a school principal and educator. And I was on this soul journeying path and totally committed to it. And I was doing a lot of writing and a lot of speaking and really coming into the truth of who I am. And my name didn't fit me anymore. It was Sarah Shoemaker and it didn't fit me anymore. And, my soul and God was like, time to give yourself your name. And so I did. And a week later, I actually got that message July of 2018 and claimed it. And then I guess it was like a couple weeks later, I was on a retreat called Soul Fire. And there was an activity to baptize yourself. And I was like, well, damn, now I get to baptize myself in a river with the name Poet. And so that's what I did. And from that moment, I was Sarah Poet, and now it's legal. And I claimed it. I claimed the name of my soul.
It's such a beautiful and interesting name. Like, I remember when we first connected on Instagram, it was like a feeling. I didn't have a thought about it. I wasn't like, that is very cool. It was like a feeling washed over me of, just like this serenity of reading your name, which is so interesting. Names hold a very powerful force. They do. I believe that names, I've talked about this so many times on the podcast. I bet people are like, okay, we know what she's going to say. But then your name is your blueprint of what you're going to experience in your life. There's a man that I had on the podcast a while ago. And man, I'm blanking on his name right now. This is so weird. But he believes that your name is you choose your name when you're in the ether between lives. You whisper it into your mom's ear, your dad's ear, and you choose a name that whatever the meaning of that name is what you didn't learn in your past life, in the life before. You're still learning it. So Sarah, for example, what does that mean?
Princess.
Oh my gosh, you're the princess poet.
So there's a book on my bookshelf that I bought and I don't really read it, but the spine of the book says princess, priestess, poet. And when I saw the book, I bought it because I was like, that's me. So for some reason I have the name princess, but the priestess and the poet. And I was in a ceremony, a plant medicine ceremony, which I know you've talked about on the podcast before. And And, it was a sacred feminine, divine feminine ceremony. And I was having a moment with my guides and with Mary Magdalene. It was really strong.
Mm.
And they were like, really good job doing that name thing. They were like, you nailed it. You remembered from when you were little, you got it. Like, you own the fuck out of it. So yay. I was like,
Yeah.
thanks, guides.
It's really cool that you have that memory from being a child.
Yeah.
So I'm super curious around that. My curiosity is whether you maybe like you can't whisper that into your parents' ear whenever you're in
No.
the ether. You can't say, and the last name too, change that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was already written in the stars of
Yeah.
what you were gonna have on your birth certificate. But then as a child, you had that very clear moment. It just goes to tell us how how spiritual we really are, that as a child, you're like, that's mine. Like your soul knew it.
Absolutely.
And then you followed up with it as an adult. What a beautiful way to mother yourself. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I will give that to you.
Yeah, which is so my path. I mean, almost sometimes in a, relentless sort of way. It's like, are you going to own that part too? And the answer always has to be, well, yeah, that's what I committed to. So it was like, oh, you want me to change my name? Okay. Oh, you want me to like paint my bedroom this really odd shade of pink and live through a year of birthing? Okay. You want me to tattoo a snake on my arm, like with 24 hours notice? Okay, and just kind of following that. And I was living like that before I admitted to myself that I was living like that. I was living in this communion with the sacred when I was a school principal. And I really had these like
Wow.
sacred practices on my own. And I had the sacred feminine reclamation. And so I had this like hidden spiritual path that didn't really fit. It all fits together now, but it didn't really fit then why all of that would be happening. And I was honoring it on such a deep level. Like that communion was so deep before I allowed myself to really know how deep it was or acknowledge how deep it was, So I talk with women about the path of sacred remembering and like bringing all parts of self back. And so, yeah, if you're going to talk about it, they're going to have to walk it.
Do you have a memory of your first sacred remembering? When
That's a good
that started
question.
to, when that, when your soul was like, oh, I remember.
Well, that's really interesting. So I'm writing a memoir right now. And a lot of my childhood was really sort of masked through the lens of emotionality and trauma. So there was a lot of what I now understand to be mental illness on the part of my father. And so we had this, you never knew what you were going to get. And so you're kind of walking on eggshells around the masculine. And so I remember a lot of the way I felt inside of me, but that was often either not validated on the outside or disregarded on the outside. So if I had a body feeling, it was like, no, that's not true, was reflected to me. So that's been a lot of my journey is like, wait, can I trust myself? Was that real? Can I trust my feelings? And so, the name thing may have been the first like really, really distinct memory like that. But I have memories of communing with the sacred, communing with parts of nature and distinct memories about being in church, knowing that something was really, really off. So I had to go to church from the time I was very, very young, and we'd kind of go in and always file into the same pew. And I had two younger sisters, were 4 and 8 years apart. And I could really tell like, oh, there's not a mention of women here. And what is mentioned of women here is not really feeling good to me. And the way they talk about women and environment is really suppressive. And so I knew that. I knew that from a really young age, but I knew it inside of myself. Like there was nowhere in my life where I could have done anything with that outside of myself. Yeah.
What sect of church was it?
Methodist.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm talking like little dinky, like white country church in Southern Pennsylvania Methodist.
We have a lot in common, Sarah. We have a lot in common. It's wild. I think I remember us kind of coming to understand that a while ago, but hearing you again, everything you just said about your dad is my mother. So I know that very intimately that, did that happen? Like, am I allowed to be upset? Does that make sense? Or wait, did I do the wrong thing? Like, you just don't know.
Yeah.
Because you're not raised with that. You're not raised with your parent reflecting to you saying, I hear you. What else? Like, I never had that.
Never.
It sounds like you didn't have that either. And
Oh,
also
no.
raised in the dinky white Baptist church with no mention of women. And if it was a mention of women, it was around purity and around submission and children, you know, was honoring your father and mother. And what's harder than being given the message? Sure, many things are harder, but in your childlike mind, it is very challenging to be given the concrete pillar of honor your father and mother. And then you have a father or mother or both who tell you that what you feel isn't real, or they disregard your experience, or they lie to you, or maybe they're physically abusive. So what a perfect storm, like being raised with these commandments in your life, and then also it not feeling right, and you having that inner knowing that this isn't right.
It's a mind fuck. It's a total mind fuck. And yeah, I would say that I rebelled against it so strongly in my adolescent years, and then I rebelled against it in thought. You know, I read women's lit. I wrote poetry on my bedroom walls. I was like, whatever. I somehow got my father to agree that I didn't have to attend church anymore after 16. And then on this like super, you know, I didn't realize my soul was aching to get in touch with the sacred feminine, or it actually just innately was. And I discovered my sexuality. I spent most of my high school years single and just like inner questing, some of the most beautiful years ever. And then I would say I found my first soulmate. I mean, real, true soulmate. And we ended up conceiving a child when I was 18. And I was supposed to be in my freshman semester of college, like 10 hours from home, and got pregnant over fall break. And so that led to a process of my child being raised full term, but being adopted. It's an open adoption. And so I chose her family, and I've always been in touch with her. I know there are a lot of adoption stories out there, so I'd like to describe that one a little bit. So we have a relationship, and she's 20 years old now, to give you an idea. And at that point in time, the shame of that, and we can go further into this, but some of the combination of the way my parents reacted combined with, I was so, what's the word? I mean, tenuous, like I was strong, but there was that dichotomy of what they thought and what I thought, you know. And then when I was, I have to leave college and come home pregnant. And there was a lot of shame and a lot of sexual shame. And the biological father was completely cast out in a really wrong way. And I shut myself down after that. I shut myself down, and I really lost the connection to the sacred for a long time. And I tried to be good for a long time. I tried to achieve, you know, because the story was, you're not ready to have this child yet. You shouldn't have even been pregnant. You know, you're doing things out of order. You're not wealthy enough yet. You're not married enough yet. You're not educated enough yet. And so you can't raise this child. But if you get your act together, then you'll be able to have another child after you have your act together. So that became my inner dialogue of like, you have to have your act together in order to be worthy of the most precious thing in the world, essentially, right? Like this beautiful baby girl. And I lost myself and completely lived under that belief that I had to be good enough before I was worthy of something so precious. And you can imagine like the subconscious commitment to that belief system, given the depth of the wound.
Mm.
It was immense. It was immense.
Did you want to raise her yourself when you were 18?
Okay, so great question. Yes, and there were core beliefs that formed at that time. And again, I'm writing the memoir, so I'm really picking it apart, right? So belief number one was tied to the unworthiness, was that my parents convinced me that this man was, pardon me, but like was shit. They convinced me he will never show up for you. He will not follow through with you and your baby. He will let you down. There is no one you can count on. And this was a part of my father's manipulation, not outright manipulation, but subconscious manipulation, I do believe. And I was the oldest of three. And so he was very controlling of the feminine. And he had me believe that no other man was to be trusted. And look at the shit I had gotten myself into. And if ever I get myself into this kind of shit, the only person I can rely on is him. So he pulled the financial, like the purse strings, and so those beliefs set in so deep. It's some of the core wounding that still comes up in relationships today, is that you will not be provided for. And so it's very interesting because the provision, the idea that I could have done it without someone's help never crossed my mind. I just believed that I couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. So there was this deep, deep core wound that there was no way I could raise my baby, and I had to give her away. So this is a very just full circle moment. So 17 years later, the biological father and I saw one another again for the first time, 17 years later. And we're having dinner, and it's very nerve-wracking and vulnerable. And I tell him, I was like, man, I've never gotten myself together financially. I've been kind of a wreck. I just never believed that I would have it all together. And so it's been this, constant struggle that I put myself through. And I said, what they told me was that you didn't want the baby, that you wouldn't have helped. Because I was 18, he was 24. And he said, Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about. He was like, I had a bedroom, I had a crib, I waited for you to come back. I had 3 jobs. I don't know what you're talking about. I would have done all of that for you and the baby. And there was nothing I wanted more. And so I looked at him across the table that night and I said, I don't know what you just did, but you just healed something really, really deep in me by letting me know that. Because there was this no one will ever meet you. No one will ever, meet you and your child and provide in that way. So, this feeling of helplessness, really, no matter what you do, you won't be worthy. Really deep, really deep stuff.
Thank you for sharing that full story. It's very clear you're writing about it right now, because the way that you're telling it is it's a story, it's storytelling. And I think a little piece of every woman listening to this feels a little more healed right now just listening to that. I can relate so deeply in my own way of the there's something so it's both patriarchal and romantic, the idea of your father being your number one, and having you and will take care of you, but also very patriarchal and very untrue of that he is the only man. It's the father of the world is here to support, especially the father in yourself. And it never comes with a this isn't the right word, but a threat of being the only one, and there's this very big story that I believe a lot of women, and a lot of Southern women in particular, and I'm sure women from different countries even more so, that are very repressive, that one, they can't do it. You can't do it. And then two, you can't do it alone, certainly. And then three, no one else will help you with it. And I imagine there are other women listening to this right now who may be single moms and feel like there might not be someone out there, not even talking about the father of the child, but a future date. So there might be women out there that think no man will want to date me when they can date someone who's much younger, much this, doesn't have kids, doesn't have this. How have you moved through any of that? If that's because you have other children, correct? Right?
Yes, I have an 11-year-old son. Yeah. So you can't see it if you're listening, but if you're watching the YouTube, I did just roll my eyes at myself, because how did I move through it? So, I mean, current snapshot is that I live in a man's house for the very first time. I was a homeowner. My father helped me to buy a house. I kind of want to go back to my father, just kind of interlude for a moment. So I could receive from him only if I deferred who I was. So it was like we had this cycle, subconsciously or consciously, or just whatever, the parent-child cycle, where he would almost implant, you can chase these dreams, go do these things. And when you fail, then I'll rescue you. But only, it was like, it was really disturbing because it wasn't even outright. There wasn't like a healthy relationship with money. It was like, when you fail, and you will, then you can ask me. But it was kind of like I don't want to ask you, it was just so twisted. And so that really took a very long time for me to break. I don't have an active relationship with my father, and specifically had to stop taking money from him, to like break the cycle a number of years ago. And yeah, and then work to heal my inner masculine. But this has come up in every relationship. The last 3 relationships, there's something even deeper. And I'm a complex woman and a deep soul, and I've figured out a lot, right? So we're kind of in the bottom of the barrel here. And I moved in with a man into his home just in spring of 2020. And he built my child a bedroom so that we could move in here. It felt like an offering of really beautiful masculine provision, which, as someone who studies masculine, feminine, there were parts of me that yearned to accept the provision of the masculine. It's vulnerable for me to do so, given everything in the past. And I was ready to really try to make a life, like make a home. So my son's father and I have been divorced for 6 years. I didn't really date very much after that, but there were a couple of serious relationships, and this pattern kept coming up. And so the man's house that I live in now, we're not currently in active partnership because this is disassembling right now. So I'm having a really close look at some of the things that you're asking. And this pattern of like, it gets to be, too much, like I become too much for the man. And then there's this pulling away on his part. And then my provision wound comes up. So it's like, I really realized within the last few months how I study the masculine, and I study the masculine shadow, and I write about it on the internet. And people, I have a big eye for this analytic. One, yeah, that's some part of my shadow that's guarding myself. But also two, is that it's part of my soul contract being a human on the planet to study this masculine and feminine, interplay and like what's distorted about it. And so he says that, he doesn't want to be in the relationship anymore. And I went into fear around, but I'm in your house and you provided a house for me and my child. Like, what are you talking about? And it went right to the core of my like safety and provision fears. And I let myself go there. I went to some shadow work sessions. We did some together, did some, did all the therapies and the things to really be like, okay, what is this? Like, what is this fear that is still kind of poking its head and resulting? I'm not blaming myself entirely, but the shadow element is there. And so, it was like looking at, why is this still happening? And part of the reason that I share that story is to say, and I love this podcast and you as a human, Maddie, for always being willing to share exactly what's real. Because I think that even myself, I can get on this like, well, have I healed it yet? Is it gone yet? And I'm currently like, no, wow, this fucking dragon of a thing is still up, no matter how much work I've done or what I know or what I'm an expert at, these things kind of still come around. And that element of what is the shadow in your deepest learning, I'm getting some of my deepest aha moments about things as big as the patriarchy right now, because I'm like, what is this? What is this hook around provision? And then, a man like cutting that off when it is my deepest wound. So there's something very soul alchemy there in that recipe,
Wow. Yeah. Jeez. Thank you for what you just said too. Like this being in it, there's a reason why you're so drawn to this work and breaking it down and the construction of it, destruction of it. And these are the kinds of relationships that have, like the one that you're in, the one that I was just in earlier this year. I believe that when we did your podcast, I was just at the house and maybe you had just moved in as well.
I
So
think
that's
I was
interesting.
getting ready to move and you had just moved with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2020 is a year for soul contracts.
Very big.
Going
Yeah.
deep. Can you give us a peek into what the shadow work session looked like when you worked around this? Because I'm really big into shadow work, and I think that word in general is becoming pretty popular, and that's nice, but it's also not great because I think a lot of people don't understand what that actually looks at to do the work, to act it out, to embrace it, to let it overtake you.
Yeah.
So what did that session look like for you, especially doing it, in the presence of him, it sounds like?
Yeah, kind of let me drop in here. So as humans, we have the ego identity and then we have the soul. And the ego wants to make us look really, good, or protect us from growing, or like give us that facade that we're good. And I think that in shadow work or in any true soul alchemy work, we need to recognize that thing, that ego, is going to want us to not go there. And then we're going to have to decide to go there. And so deciding to go there with my friend who is the shadow work practitioner in front of a man who I am not experiencing that he will go there with me, but to stand there and do that work, I think that was, this isn't exactly what you asked, but I think that was one of the first times that he really saw me be me, because I was like, there is a provision wound right here. And once again, I'm mistrusting the universe because of a man. And so I'm going to get it. Like I came today to find that wound, you know, and really went after it. And so the process was the practitioner asking, well, what are the narratives in your head? And then we had, if it would have been a group situation, different people would have stood in for these parts, right? Like these voices are different parts in you. And so we used chairs. So we were like on a round carpet, we call it carpet work. And then you take a piece of fabric from a collection on the wall and drape it over the chair. So there's this expression in the fabric that's like a color, a texture, a print that kind of stands for this belief, this rhetoric, this part. And then we give every part a line, like a voice. I need to take a sip of water. Excuse me. And then we have to be in the feeling that is evoked with the line.
So interesting, losing your voice right now.
Isn't it? I know. I've had a little sickness actually the last few days. Oh. So yeah, that's why I have my hot tea. I know, but I am talking about the voice. So the lines of each part and like the beliefs of each part are stood for on the carpet with you. And then you get to look at how those voices really determine your behavior. And so what I found was, and it's really interesting too, like even the placement of the chairs on the carpet say something. So right in the center turned out to be the voice of my father that was saying, you know, I don't remember exactly, but it was like, you'll never fully have it. You'll never fully be okay without me, kind of thing, or something like that. And so what ended up happening at the end is that there's a transmutation. And I was in this like red piece of fabric because this was a part, like my queen self was a part that was on the carpet, you know, there was a very rational part that was like, this isn't, you know, very rational part. And so in the end, then when he asked what wanted to happen, that part moved into the middle. I actually wrapped myself in it. And then the queen dialogued with each of the parts. And just came back to center.
It sounds like family constellation.
A little bit. I've never, I know about that, but I've never done that. I do a lot of internal family systems work and parts work. So yeah, I'm sure there are similarities in a lot of them.
So if you were to put, because you're in the process, you're very much in the process, you're uncovering things. If you were going to put words right now to what your queen would say to your provision wound, she's giving you a sacred remembering jewel. And it's wherever you are at today. Might be different tomorrow. But if your queen was to give you some sort of sacred remembering jewel around the provision wound, and this is also, you know, this is an extension to everyone listening, anyone else going through this experience, which I have a feeling is a lot of people.
A lot, yeah.
A lot of things are shifting, a lot of different, I just left where I was in a cocoon, you know. And we all, man, I think all of us primally have a provision wound. It might not be front and center, but it's there. It's the fear of not being taken in by the you know, tribe, the community, the circle.
Well, and I've been looking at this too, right? And this gets to your question, and I'll come back to the answer about what the queen would say. So, you know, I'm like, okay, I'm going deep. What is this? What is this? And it was very interesting how the word victim came up. And this kind of came up in my last breakup. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be a victim. You know, what is that? And so I was like, where am I in victim consciousness? And that wound is a patriarchal wound. You're saying you're sure that some women share it. We share it. This fear that we will not be provided for. And as I dig into it, there's a false king that's erected in the patriarchy, this false, like, tyrannical king. And that is what many of us have associated with the masculine from early on, before we're getting conscious about what the masculine is.
Like Prince Charming?
No, I'm talking about like my father and your father with the mental illness, but still a lot of rules and programming. My father really systematically suppressing my feminine. Mm-hmm. So he was playing that out. I do want to say that my father was bipolar, and he had very, very loving times also. Like, it was very unpredictable, but I just wanted to, like, say that right there, honor that the man, had his trauma and played out that way. But he had a big heart, but that heart was taken over by what had happened to him, the programs that he had received about the patriarchy, what men are supposed to be, what men cannot be. And so that provision wound about, will I be provided for? That's a systemic, like, feminine repression, patriarchal wound, right? So the feminine was taken from, the feminine was not able to have access to resources systematically in a patriarchy. And so this is, it's like it's ingrained and embedded until we heal it, and it's not. And so that's what my queen self found, was this choice to really disrupt any potential threat. I mean, maybe I missed one, that's being human, but it's like, okay, what can I clean up right now of any story that's remaining about victim? Because if it's a victim victimizer story, that's not unity. That's trauma mindset. That's service to self because you're self-protective and not sure that you're going to get your needs met. That's a really scary place to be. That really perpetuates sort of that old narrative and that old energetic, between women and men, but also between feminine and masculine. And so a lot of my personal work is like that inner queen and inner king union, what I call mother and father God union in me and my relationship to that, and the true union of that. And so you can't have the union of that and also still have a victim victimizer story running. And so I would also say to anyone listening that, if you have that, I mean, heck, and so much more, it's like, it's not just yours. We share that as a collective of women. And I believe that we can also heal that as a collective of women. Some of these things run in us like programs, like software that was really downloaded a long time ago. And so it's a choice of, like, looking at, where am I still running that programming that says I'm not enough, or that I have to depend on something, outside of myself that's not God, to provide for me, or to tell me that I'm okay. And then how do we disrupt that and come back to that personal sovereignty? So that's what my queen's up to.
She's got some juicy wisdom for us. While you were talking, I had another little question come from the space of needs. Like, when do you allow yourself to go into needing anything outside of yourself from a relationship? What's your stance on that? Because there's so much talk, and all the books are about being what it is that you want. And I agree. And I love your bio, how you wrote financial sovereignty, and there's emotional sovereignty. It's all the different layers of sovereignty. Yes, yes, yes. I believe that from that space, when you are being everything that you desire, when you're just being it, and you're you don't get what you want, you get what you are, is basically what
Yeah.
I live by. And from that space, there are still things that I know I desire in relationship. So it's not so much of a need, it's more of a desire because you feel it yourself. And yet, speaking of being primal creatures, there are things and there is something so beautiful, I think, about looking, taking a bird's eye view and looking at us as humans, and like
Mm-hmm.
kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
laughing and being like, oh my God, we really do need each other,
Yeah.
and allowing that to be okay. In relationship is where the lines become a little bit more blurry and it's harder to see on what is a need, what is codependency, what's just pure
Right.
communion. What are your thoughts
Oh my
on
gosh.
that?
So many thoughts on that. Right. And then if we're trying to be modern women who are also conscious and sacred and leading our men into kingship, that's a whole other layer of like, what are you willing to be with? Um, all right. Great question. Do you have needs? Yes, we are primal creatures. So, I mean, we need connection in the body. We need we need touch. You know, I really believe that we need those things, you know, for our survival. Um, my notion of relationships has really changed over the years because I'm on such an intimate soul journey, and in such depths that what I continue to sort of, I'll say, struggle with, and one of the reasons why I do think that this relationship is in breakdown is because there's always, and no women are going to relate to this, especially because a lot of women are having awakenings and their male partners may not be. I think more women right now are having awakenings than their male partners. So when I got here to this land is actually sacred. It was probably Cherokee land. There's activity in the earth that I began to awaken to. Had never had these kinds of visions before. So I got here to this land and had a spiritual awakening again. Wasn't planning on it. One of the reasons that I said yes to this partnership was because I was like, I'm just ready to be kind of a normal human. I'm ready to not need to share that immense depth of soul journey with like a soul union partner. Because what had happened was that I believed that I had found that partner and it didn't work. And so I was in this space of, you know, I just want a life on it. This is like a farm property. And, you know, he's a good man and he has a relationship with God. And when we were intimate, you know, God would come through those spaces. And I knew that I wanted to know God through union. And the rest was kind of like, meh, he doesn't need to be on my soul journey with me. And then we got here and there was this awakening. And what I witnessed, and this is what I witnessed in the last two partners as well, is that the bigger I became, this is my story, my narrative, this is not his, the, the bigger I became and the more it felt like life was saying, Sarah, you dimmed this light. Now I'm here to remind you that this is your path. Are you going to talk about inner Christos Sophia union? Are you going to really, really follow through the whole way with this masculine, feminine union, Christic path that you came for? Or are you going to be okay, like turning yourself down a little bit? And that's more and more what the question became. And I work with women every single day who are asking themselves, how do I have all of my truth and still have my relationship, especially when provision is involved? And so I work with a lot of women who fit that profile. And so here I am, and my needs are not the walls of this home. My needs turned out to be that I do need a partner that can honor my soul journey. He doesn't have to live it. He's in the masculine, right? Like he's a Virgo. He's an earth worker. He's a crusader for the environment, like very respectable. But I do need to be able to have my journey, and I do need to be able to live every part of my truth, even if I've got some shadowy shit coming up. And that was something that I needed to give myself. And I think, to be honest with myself, I entered into this relationship almost willing to make those sacrifices on my soul journey. But because I was just kind of tired, because I was like tired of chasing that union. Yeah. And so this is really my, like, no, you don't settle. You don't, I don't want to like erase, not saying that he was settling, but I was settling inside of myself for, I wasn't, I thought I could do the soul journey. And then I started to have this awakening again. And I was like, oh shit, I got to own all this. I got to own all this. And he started to have problems with what I wrote on Facebook. And, you know, and that's like the first sign when a man is concerned about how you're using your voice, or when a man is concerned how I am using my voice. I'm like, oh, here's that same damn pattern again. So I need sovereignty. I did not come to sacrifice who I am for a relationship and partnership. I don't believe that that has to happen, but I think that we have a lot of work to do on this patriarchal programming that is inside of us, that is collective. And two people have to be really willing to be very conscious to go through that kind of programming together. Mm-hmm. As you talk about all the time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that example there. Cause that was going to be one of my next questions of what does that look like to honor? Like what's the difference between the relationship you just had and what you want, of the honoring, and you providing that example of the Facebook, and kind of like, wait, I don't think this feels right with me. You know, I think some of our core wounds here overlap, because mine, I would word it a little differently. Mine is more around, I feel that everyone wants to control me or manipulate me.
I've heard you talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like my scariest place in a relationship is when I start to feel like I am being controlled. And then the instigator for that is, am I being manipulated? And the manipulation goes into many different avenues, with coaches that I hire, with clients that I have, with friends that I have, am I doing it? Like manipulation is a big theme in my life, which is kind of funny because truthfully, we're manipulating all day, and it's not bad, because when we are, for example, like you're very familiar with this in the feminine work, whenever we are in the feminine and we reveal our excitement about something because we want him to do it more, that is, in fact, manipulation in a beautiful way. You're being expressive. You're using it for good. You're an angel of manipulation, because you're being excited and it's making him go, oh, she likes it when I bring home sushi. I'll do that more. It's good. We're getting more and more love. We're being manipulated into love. But that's not the side most of us are paying attention to. That's not the way we think of manipulation. We think of trying to get what we want through actions that are hurting us, that are dismissing us, gaslighting. And so for me, one of the lines that I'm here to walk, I'm walking the plank of learning how to be in partnership with people, very similar to what you're saying. So for me, like, a pillar that's very important for me is that my voice is not censored. Same as what you're saying here. My voice cannot be censored. And my line, the plank that I'm walking here, is honoring my voice while also honoring the voices and opinions and desires of others, because I can bulldoze. I'm so headstrong on writing that erotic poem about our last night of passionate lovemaking. You're not going to stop me from writing this poem and putting out into the world. or you're not going to stop me from writing about this. Like, you can't stop me. And yeah, I'm very big on the gene keys. I'm very big on everything I learned through Gene Key World about going to these acidic states of embodying the ultimate gift of love and everything. And so for me, I've had to learn of like, how is that being a victim of, I'm not gonna stop, censoring, and how, and am I in fact making a compromise of love when I bulldoze over the person I love's feelings? This is all getting a little bit complex, but what I'm doing is agreeing very much so with you in that no matter what relationship I'm in, I have to continue down this path of meeting God in union and truth in the online space and writing and poetry and podcasts, whatever. I don't want to feel like I have to walk on eggshells of what's real and change. I have to know that forever till the day I die, I can change. I can go to Egypt and visit really holy spots and have a partner who supports that. I have to be able to dye my hair red the next day if I want. He doesn't have to like it, but let me do what I want to do, or this or that. And then with all of those three things, the greatest challenge in all of that is, how do I continue to do that through love?
Right.
Welcoming him in to the process instead of going, this is the way I am, take it or leave it.
Right.
How do I move from that to, this is the way I am, do you want to join me?
Yep. Yeah. So I coach women on this, and I don't feel I just did it the best myself. And I think that that's where the grace comes in, to be like, yeah, I'm a human with wounds. So are you. No matter how much self-work we've done, because he's done a lot too, but our shit got triggered. And it got triggered. And I went to analysis, because that's what I do, right? Like if a couple is sitting before me and they want to know where their pain points are, I'm like, oh, look, you're doing that and you're doing that. Let's fix it. I can energetically heal that shit when it's somebody else. And I'm not very strong at doing that in my own partnership or with Grace, which I've been owning recently. But one thing that came through sort of during all of this, there was a divine instruction to do a set of channeled activations for the Divine Mother. So Divine Mother activation series. And I did that, and it was very strong and impactful. And then the next download was, okay, now do one on the feminine heart. And so I'm in this 4-week activation series with a small group of women on the feminine heart. And that was like God's way of being, oh, you want to go through this time of a death in relationship and learn a little something, Sarah? I'm going to have you be in the feminine heart, consciously decide to be in the feminine heart. So I am not getting it right all of the time, but I am learning a lot. And I think one of the things that I definitely could have done with more grace, like I was saying, is asked more questions and just left some other stuff alone, really. He's really sweet in that so we were having this, what I would call an initiation, a soul initiation. So I moved in and shit got crazy. There was a missing cat. There was, like all of these different things. And then I had this animal communicator, and we're on the phone with the animal communicator, and he's showing up in the masculine, and he's like, how can I help? And she starts talking about our dynamic. And he was like, what is this? This is not relationship work. We're talking to an animal communicator. Like, what's going on? And so it was really too fast and furious for him. And that just might be me. Like I might be too fast and furious. And I wasn't owning that full capacity in the beginning of our relationship. But I also think, and I just really want to say this for everyone, and this has been a huge part of my learning, that there is going to be a part in every relationship where when the wound is triggered, the safety mechanisms will come into play. Like, how do I keep myself safe here? What is that person doing to me?
Where are they manipulating me? And that's
Yeah,
the thing.
right. Right. And so we went too fast, too far, too tender. And he's just like, I'm out. I'm not going to those places. And so I know that that's very scary. And but it's a huge arena. And I know that so many listeners are like, yeah, do I want my relationship? Do I need to go to these places? Like, women are making these sacrifices, and maybe men too, I'm sure. But, making these sacrifices of like, can I have all of me if I am in this? And I do believe that we can. But I don't have like a list of desires for next relationship. I'm a mom, I'm an entrepreneur. I really want to dive into my next level of work and me, and listening to this sacred remembering that's really coming through, that I feel can come through now, because I feel like a huge, like, this pattern, this distortion is done. That was my vow to myself, is that this is the last time. Like, if this relationship is going to die, this is the last time I'm doing this. So let me see. Like, that was my prayer. Let me see. And I could see that we need to stay in the heart. We need to stay in the heart. And that's where union is anyway. And and to stop running the victim programming. So
yeah. Well, I celebrate all of that. And I know that is being reflected in the ether, in the world, so much right now. I'm seeing it left, right, and it's so great. Like you were just talking about how you weren't being very strong at it, right? And I had the same experience like 4 months ago.
Yeah.
Wildly triggered and wildly ungraceful at times. Yeah, for sure. And the great thing, the beautiful thing is when we use those experiences of being ungraceful to explore and to get curious, and to, because then it is all it always is for the good, but then it really is for the good.
This is the alchemy. I mean, this is really what's possible. Right. And so, prior, and I have so many examples of it, I've shared some here, when you get it wrong, quote unquote, in today's society, the initial response is a shame response. And so I choose to be in integrity, but I don't choose to play in the shame arena anymore. I just don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Me neither.
No.
It's like, it's not even anything any kind of response, in my body. There's nothing that's like the concave, like, oh no, what did I do? It's more like, whoa, what'd I do? Wow. Like, let's explore that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's powerful. So before we guide everyone to check you out online and connect with you further, is there any last droplet or inkling of love you want to offer Mind Body Musings listeners?
Thank you so much for asking, Maddie, and for having me, and for everyone listening to be here. So what I'm really passionate about is this concept that we are sacred. As women, we are sacred. Of course, every human, every being is sacred. But when we have some of the programming that you and I grew up in those little white churches, and, it's like, wait, does that live outside of me? And how do I find it? And how do I know if what's coming through me is sacred information or not sacred information? How do I know what's truth? And like, it's so arduous sometimes, this path of what I call sacred remembering. But when we're looking at, okay, what is the sacred feminine? How do I embody it? Like, what do I do? it can kind of feel like arduous work or like a lot of layers peeling from the outside. And so what I'm really passionate about is inviting women to align to the truth first, like the core truth of who you are. And the more we exercise that muscle of respecting the self as truly sacred, I think that it's such a gift that we can give ourselves. I think it really does present that alchemy possibility in our lives. It switches us from an identification with a trauma to an identification with our truth. And it really helps to change the tide, like to shift the tide of the patriarchy. So each woman choosing that sacred self, that sacred core self, is such an act of beauty for the whole, really.
You are allowed to choose. You are allowed to choose, just like you chose your last name. Like that's really a huge deal, is to just to think, you know what, this isn't my last name, that is. And you choosing that.
Yeah. Well, there's just a funny thing. So I live in North Carolina, and at the courthouse in North Carolina, a woman has to post publicly her intent to change her last name. And if anyone should, disagree, then they can take that to the court within those 14 days. If anyone should object to a woman changing her name. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, we're still in it.
We are very much still in it. Cool. Love it.
Wow. Yeah. So yes, you can choose, and there's going to be old bullshit that you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah. My blood is like a little bit at boiling point, but we're just going to bring it back down, cool it off.
Right. Yeah.
Oh,
you can choose. There's going to be bullshit, and you can keep choosing. Like you can keep aligning to the truth.
Holding the pose. Yep. Hold the pose. Beautiful. So where can everyone find you on the interwebs and connect with you further?
Awesome. Thanks for asking. sarahpoet.com, sarahpoet.com. And everything's there, including the Sacred Remembering podcast. The podcast is also on Apple and Spotify, so people can just download that. And yeah, I'm really all about women's groups and women's group alchemy. So you can find current information about what women's groups are coming up on my website. But then I'm also on Facebook, Sarah Poet, and I have a free Facebook group there called Sacred Remembering, like the name of the podcast. And so women can jump right in with authentic conversations and ask questions. And yeah, we'll talk about this life of reclaiming.
I love it. I will make sure I have all of the links that she just mentioned in the show notes to this. So if you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on Mind Body Musings on iTunes or Spotify, you can go to maddymune.com/Sarah-Poet. All of the links, the show notes will be found there. And let us know on Zigram what you thought of this. Tag us, take a screenshot of you listening on iTunes or wherever you are listening, and let us know your thoughts, or you can share them on the little audiogram that I post for this episode. And yeah, it's just been so beautiful to have you with us. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much.
So glad we did this.
Yeah. Yes, me too. Thank you, Maddie.
Bye.
Bye.